Hello and welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Fara Sax. A new groundbreaking report has just come from the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade. It reveals the underreported link between gun violence and the underserved communities in South Florida. Joining me today is one of its authors. Viviana is joining me today, and I'm so excited to hear all that you do for the community and what your work is with the Women's Fund. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
What do you do as the Director of Research and Policy?
Yeah, so at the Women's Fund, we create positive change for women and girls in our community in Miami-Dade County. And we do this through advocacy, we do this through grant making, and we do this through research, because we believe that without data and research, women and girls are invisible in our community. So we're making sure to fill in that gap and make them visible again.
And how long have you been with the Women's Fund?
I've been with the Women's Fund for 5 years.
And she's still smiling.
I'm still smiling, yes.
So let's talk about this. You share in this really incredible report, The Invisible Victims, a gendered focus on gun violence in Miami-Dade County. How did this happen? How did it become through fruition?
Going off of the basis that without gender data, it makes women and girls invisible, we had this opportunity to apply for a grant from the Carrie Meek Foundation. It's a Supporting Safer Communities grant. And it was focused around gun violence. And we said, well, what is the interlink between gender and gun violence? It's very much unrecorded. We see a real need and a gap to research this further. That's really where it came from and where it started. And the invisible victims, it's about the survivors, right? So I want to mention that the use of victim is very much intentional, because when you think about gun violence, the majority of the time you think about males. The majority of victims are males. And so you're not putting into perspective that gendered focus of the other side of the coin, that not only do males get shot, so do women, but also women are bearing the burden of having to deal with these shootings that are happening in our community, right? So we're looking at them knowing that they are survivors, but also looking at them intentionally as these quote unquote victims.
And these are reported cases.
Yes.
So how many are unreported? It would probably be quite astounding.
Absolutely. It also happens a lot with when you think about gender-based violence. Most of the reports on gender-based violence go unreported. So there is definitely some incidents that might not get reported. We're hoping that with gun violence, there is a little bit more visibility, as police departments tend to track these types of incidents a lot more than, let's say, domestic violence or even sexual offenses.
Interesting. Let's talk about, in the report, it highlights that Miami-Dade, it lacks the gender, the race, the ethnic data. Let's go into that. We have a couple of graphs here.
Yes.
Walk us through them.
So what you're seeing right here is the number of gun violence victims by gender. Now, we went through the time period of 2018 to 2022. We were just looking at those years, and you're looking at data compiled from 5 different police departments. You're looking at data from the Miami-Dade Police Department, City of Miami, Miami Beach, Homestead, and Florida City. So only 5 municipalities.
And how many are there in Miami-Dade? There's 30 something.
Yeah, there's 30 something municipalities, right? And so what you can see here with the broken down by gender, clearly there are more male victims of gun violence shootings than they are females. But what we're seeing is that
You mean maybe woman to against men, or man against man? How does that mean? What does that mean?
This is just victims. So we don't even know who the perpetrator is in these cases, right? We have the data and we could collect it and we could show it in a graph. But for the purposes of this one, we're just looking at who got shot. So you're seeing also like a really big hike in 2020.
Is this during the pandemic?
During the pandemic.
So people were pent up
People were pent up. There was an increase in violence. And you can see that clearly just from the data that we gathered of these 5 municipalities, right? But this is very much the gender breakdown. And I think if you want to go to the next, yep, right here. This is also really important because this is the rate. So what you're seeing is that the overall rate is really, it's been increasing. And it decreased after the big spike that we see in 2020, but we see an upwards trajectory now in 2022. So my guess is 2023, we're going to also see a bit of a hike as well in the rates.
Interesting. Next slide.
For this one, we see the number of gun violence victims by gender and by race. And this is really important. We don't only like to put in like this gender lens that we call it. We do a gender and a racial lens, right? So what you see here is that you can see that the majority of victims are Black males. But what you see as well is that the majority for female victims, you have a disparity between Black females and white females, with a higher percentage of Black females being victims of gun violence in our community.
Why is that?
It's a variety of causes. What we were trying to do is look at municipalities that we knew had the highest rates.
And which ones are those?
You're looking at City of Miami. You're looking at Florida City. One of the municipalities that we didn't get information from, but that we know has a little bit more incidents, is Cutler Bay. So trying to really hone in on those specific communities. So you will see a higher rate also when you go into the report. You'll see higher rates because of this as well. You'll see that we have a higher national rate, but that is because we intentionally focused on these municipalities. So you're not looking at the big picture of the whole county. And that is because, unfortunately, the data is not easily accessible.
Why isn't it? Isn't it become public record?
It is public record.
She says with a smile,
do
but
say
there
with
is
a
a caveat in this.
Yes. It is public records, and that's how we get our data. We put in public records request. What happens is that a lot of the times what we found is that police departments either don't have the ability to give us these reports because they don't have enough staff. They don't have enough capacity work-wise. They're just all over the place. Sometimes they don't have the software that they need in order to extract those reports in an easy and timely manner. And also there's a certain cost involved. We put in a variety of different public records requests for a lot of the other municipalities. And in some of them, they were asking for really astronomical charges. And it was because there was a lot of really hand paper work involved that required a lot of hours for their staff. So they were charging for that, which is reasonable, right? So there's a real lack of system in order to process these types of requests. Oftentimes, they have the gender data, they have the racial stuff, but they're not able to extract it in an easy manner from the reports, the police reports that they're getting.
Absolutely. We have another graph?
Yes, we do. So this is the number of gun violence victims by gender and ethnicity, right? So that's something that we want to take into consideration. And this is a really interesting one because as you see, you really see a spike in 2020, but you're seeing a larger spike in 2022. And if you look at 2018, those numbers are very low. What you're seeing is a real increase in the number of gun violence victims in the Hispanic community, because that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at Hispanics and Latinos. And
these are what you're saying, the underserved community. These are in areas that are...
They're part of the same municipalities that we looked at. And actually for the ethnicity one, it excludes Florida City. They did not have ethnicity data provided. Right. So I can't say that they're part of the underserved community because they are part of that larger scope of municipalities that we're looking
Right,
for.
right.
But it does highlight that there are discrepancies in how the data shows that race plays a part, and so does ethnicity.
Interesting. And then there are other parts of this report. The women pregnant, the leading cause of death among during pregnancy and postpartum period, with nearly 70% of these homicides involving firearms.
Absolutely.
Wow. So let's speak to that. What is going on?
So those are national statistics, and we assume that we have quite a similar situation happening here in Miami, but unfortunately there's not a lot of data available to that. So I can't tell you for sure if that's the case here. But what you see is that during a pregnancy, there are heightened tensions. And that makes for relationships that are already abusive. If there is a gun in the home, the perpetrator is more likely to use it, meaning that you'll have cases where pregnant women will lose their lives due to domestic abuse and the use of a firearm.
That is staggering. Are these guns that are registered? Do you find out if these guns are, hot off the back door, or you have no data with that?
I have no data with that.
Wow. Let's talk about some other statistics.
Sure. We can talk about how, especially for the Hispanic community, it was extremely difficult for us to do a lot of the work that we were trying to do because there's a lot of cultural stigma around talking about gun violence. These are also communities that are coming with trauma from their own countries, Latin American countries that have gun violence, and now they're coming here and then seeing that again in their community.
Is it from a familial situation, or is it just because they're living in that particular environment?
It can be both, right? With domestic situations, we know that having a gun presence makes you more likely to die. With also within the community, the access to guns being so readily available, unfortunately, makes it that these incidents happen. But the Hispanic community is also extremely scared of mass shootings, right? And what we saw in Pulse, targeting not only LGBTQI plus community, but also Hispanics, right? So they're like, okay, well, this didn't happen anywhere. And that very much is the fear. When you're back in other Latin American countries, you're saying, okay, well, if I stay away from that area, nothing's going to happen. You're coming here, it's like, well, it can happen at this movie theater. So there's a little bit of everything going on.
And it's a very double-edged sword, because you can't have a gun in a movie theater. But you're also disarming those that could possibly be your hero with a cape and a gun that could save your life. So it really is, there's two things going on here.
Yep.
What kind of education do you provide with this data that you've put together? What happens next? How do we educate the underserved, the Latin community that are being not served enough and being educated? How does the Women's Fund step in?
So we're doing a lot of we have currently a public awareness campaign out, and we did a previous one on gun safety. So how to keep guns safe when there are children present, or when just in your home, right? How do you keep it safe and away from the hands of people that might be ill-intentioned, or accidents, right? Accidents happen all the time, and one around gun safety, and now this new one around the invisible victims, because we want to highlight that this is not a male conversation. And that's what happened a lot in what you'll see in the report is that a lot of the literature around gun violence is focused around males, oftentimes around Black males, because they are the majority of victims. However, we can't silo the conversation to be solely about males. We have to make sure that we're putting that gender lens and making sure to understand how women are impacted, how they bear such a burden when they become widowed, when they become single mothers, when the mom just lost her child? What are the resources that are provided to these women?
What are some of the resources?
The county has some really great resources,
Mm-hmm.
but these are resources that also need funding, and that need to go a step beyond. And what has happened is that you're seeing a lot of community organizations step into those roles, but a lot of community organizations, they also need a lot more funding to provide these programs. But resources can include bereavement groups, support groups, somebody to help you do the groceries, especially right after an incident, somebody to talk to make sure that if you need help from the government, that they're helping you do all the documentation. That's a really big barrier for a lot of these victims that need either financial support from the government or they need any other type of resource, and then they're forced to do a bunch of paperwork, and maybe they don't even have an ID, right? So what are the steps, and who can guide you to do those steps while you're grieving or while you're been through this trauma that you want to make sure that is holding your hand and walking you through it?
So what would be a good way for someone that might be listening that might be a victim or surviving from a victim that had happened? Where do they reach? Who can they call? What website can they reach to get started on their path for healing and for some guidance?
So we currently we currently do have a list of resources.
But Women's Fund Miami.org.
women'sfundmiami.org/gunsafe. We have a list of resources, and we'll be adding more concise lists of resources on there that you can check and call. The county also does provide services that is on their website, but we wanted to make sure to highlight all the other community organizations that might not be included on there, so that you can go in and find the resource exactly for your needs.
Right. And you've worked in a variety of international environments. And mind you speak how many languages? 3?
3, yes.
Fluently?
Yes.
Spanish, French, English?
Spanish, French, and English.
Yeah.
Yes.
How has this diverse background that you have shaped your approach to addressing gender-based violence and gun violence in Miami-Dade? Knowing that you've been in so many different areas and seen so many different types of people, what do you bring to the table that you can identify with?
Miami's such an amazing, culturally diverse environment and community that I think my background, especially, I'm Puerto Rican. So yes.
Where are you originally from?
Yup. San Juan, Puerto Rico.
San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, you know. And
yeah,
so
she's got it going on.
Yes. So bringing in that Hispanic warmth and Latina, being a Latina myself, understanding that this is a struggle that I didn't even realize until I was doing the report that I've actually gone through. These are I've had personal experiences with gun.
So this is relatable.
Very much relatable, but I didn't make the link.
Of course not, until you do the work, right?
Until I did the work.
So how did it affect you personally, you said?
I think a lot of the times when you're doing this type of work, you're dealing with people who have gone through a lot of trauma. So they don't mean to, but as they share their stories, it imprints a little bit on you, right? You're taking that trauma in.
You're human.
We're human. We empathize with them. We are trying to understand them. We're trying to relieve some of their grief. And so it stays with us. It stays with us and my team. And I know, and we were very intentional about seeking out any mental health help that we needed, because it was so heavy at times. Because we're talking day in and day out with a lot of mothers that lost their sons. We're talking with organizations that do this every day, that don't necessarily have the resources, and you feel a little like, what can I do? And this is what we can do. We can make sure that the information is out there.
Talk to me about one person, family that imprinted you, that you saw go through exactly what we've been talking about the last half hour of gun violence? And where are they now?
It was actually, I'm going to name two people, and they were an inspiration.
That's amazing that through their trauma and loss, they become your inspiration. It's a very telling, isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. We had this amazing discovery, I guess, within our own team of seeing these women who had lost their sons, their children, and seeing them transformed into advocates for anti-gun initiatives, and really seeing them as leaders in the community. So they were really powerful. They were really inspirational, how they were taking all of that hurt and grief and despair that they had over losing their children and really turned that into action. Their names are Romania Dukes, Love Romania, and Denise Brown. They were absolutely amazing, sharing their stories with us and knowing that they are doing good in the community now because of something so unfortunate that happened.
And what was their loss?
Both of them lost their sons.
Their sons.
To gun violence. But they're just forces of nature. Those women are amazing.
Where do you think that strength comes from, or that as you see, they were your inspiration?
Yeah.
Where does it come from within them, do you think, that spark?
Being women and having to be resilient and having to continue and having to fight and having to seek justice, because that's what they were doing. They were seeking justice.
Did they get the justice that they seeked?
Some of them did.
Yeah.
Some of them haven't, but they continue to work. They continue to work, and they continue to work in the community to make our community safer. And these are the people that we also wanted to highlight during this report. Yes, it looks bleak, and are we going in the right direction? No, we're not going in the right direction. But there are these beacons of light within our community that already have the answers, and that we can learn so much from them.
What inspired you to want to write this report, and how long did it take you to put it together?
It was a year-long.
You had an assistant?
Yes.
You said? Yeah. What's her name?
Madeline Lee.
Hello, Madeline.
Hello, Madeline. She is amazing. She lives in California, and she's been a research assistant for 3 years. And between both of us, as well as with help from other colleagues, and with having one of our advisors, Dr. Maria Elcheva, and she is our board chair, actually, at the Women's Fund, and having them support all of this work, I think the inspiration comes from knowing that we need to do this work, because if not, these stories don't get told. And throughout the entire process, we wanted to make sure that we were being intentional and that we were doing it justice, that we were bringing these stories with as less judgment as possible, right? There was no judgment. There was very much of, we just want to hear your voice. And I think it's time for you to share your story, because the world needs to know.
100%. And we talked about there has been spikes, ebbs and flows within the every year with gun violence. What do we need to do as a community to help bring those numbers down? To help educate, possibly, to connect with our community, so that this will be a thing of the past? I think I'm living in fairy tale land, but as much as we can, so that the education is out there and no women or children are harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And men.
Yes. It's a community effort. But I would say that a lot of these problems and gun violence is very much rooted in systemic racism, and how that perpetrates into the economic mobility of a lot of these communities.
Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So what happens is that historically, there has been systemic racism affecting these these marginalized and underfunded and underserved communities that have led to their ability to have economic mobility. So they're living in poverty. Living in poverty means that you don't have a lot of economic opportunities, and therefore you seek other ways to find those economic opportunities, right? So we know that gun violence is directly linked to poverty, and we know that because we've seen it in these communities. And so, but it's very much rooted in that systemic racism that has alienated these communities. And so we want to make sure that the solutions that arise are grounded in that understanding that this is linked to poverty. Poverty leads to gun violence. How do you address gun violence? You address poverty. You address economic opportunities with programs like community violence prevention programs that are already rooted in the community. They know what they need. They have the solutions. So let's make sure to fund them as well, right? That's another way that we can address gun violence. Making sure that we're giving economic or work training to community members that need it. Making sure that they have the mental health access and resources, that they're able to get better themselves and then not need to seek out those other avenues. And first and foremost, also legislation. Let's make sure that our policymakers know that this is a problem that we can address with policies, that we can make sure to take them out of the wrong hands, that we don't have somebody who has a history of domestic violence purchasing a gun because their partner is going to be more likely to die at their hands. And what you'll see is also a lot of homicide suicides in these types of domestic violence. So where the perpetrator comes, they'll kill the other person and then they kill themselves, right?
So we're talking about stricter background checks?
Stricter background checks, closing the boyfriend loophole, because what is considered a partner has been a loophole. So making sure that not only husbands, right, we're also looking at boyfriends, we're looking at intimate partners, any type of partner in a domestic situation or in an intimate partner relationship. And so that they're having that background check, that there is a waiting period while this background check is happening, so that we can make sure that we're keeping the guns away from the hands that are perpetrating a lot of this violence.
Who would you like to get this report into the hands of? You worked darn hard on it for the last year. Look at it. Who would you like to contact? Who would you like to know about this that might not be in your sphere right now?
I'd very much like the entire Miami-Dade delegation to know about this.
Delegation being whom?
Delegation being our representatives, our senators, our commissioners, making sure that they know that this exists and that they're reading through it and that they're understanding. Because we've put out not only the research, but we're also providing some policy recommendations on what they can do. And the general public at large as well. Because we can't push for solutions if the majority of people don't even know that it is a problem and how to address it.
Viviana, beautifully said. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's been a half hour. Can't believe it.
Oh my gosh, time flew by.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
From the Women's Fund. And if you want more information, it's on the screen below. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Fara Sax. Have a great day.